Before we dive into this chilling tale, make sure to hit like and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. You won't want to miss the true, dark accounts I'm about to share. So sit tight and let's begin. The excitement was undeniable. I had been counting down the days for weeks, and now finally, I was standing at the edge of the pier, looking up at the massive S meridian. It was everything I had hoped for. Grand, sleek, and exuding a sense of luxury that made me feel like I was about to step into an adventure of a lifetime. The salty breeze from the ocean felt fresh, and the sun was blazing brightly overhead, casting a warm glow on everything. I could already hear the chatter of passengers, the clinking of glasses, and the sound of footsteps on the deck as they made their way to their cabins. Everyone around me seemed to be buzzing with excitement. I was alone on this trip, not that it bothered me. In fact, I was looking forward to some time away from the noise of everyday life. The idea of drifting out into the ocean with nothing but waves surrounding me was exactly what I needed. The ship was packed with families, couples, and solo travelers, all of them eager to start their vacation. I could almost feel the collective anticipation in the air, like everyone was ready for the escape they'd been dreaming of. As I boarded, I couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the ship. The interior was just as stunning as the outside marble. Floors, sparkling chandeliers, and an elegant bar that seemed to invite relaxation. I checked into my cabin and threw my suitcase on the bed, eager to explore. There was a sense of freedom on a cruise, a feeling that nothing could go wrong. The whole world felt far away, and it was just me, the sea, and endless possibilities. But as I unpacked my clothes and arranged them neatly in the wardrobe, something caught my eye: a small, unmarked brochure left on the desk. It seemed out of place, its edges worn as if it had been there for a long time. Curious, I picked it up. The front page read, "Safety instructions for your stay on the SS Meridian." But something about it felt strange. The writing was in a font I didn't recognize, and the pictures of the ship appeared. Odd, almost like they were taken decades ago. I shrugged it off. I was probably just overthinking things. People didn't really pay attention to the safety brochures on these trips anyway, right? I stepped out onto the balcony to get a better view of the ocean. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden hues across the horizon. As I leaned on the railing, the sound of waves crashing against the ship was soothing. I was starting to relax, to let go of the worries that had been building up in my life. This vacation was going to be perfect. Nothing could spoil it. But then, as I was about to turn back to my cabin, I felt a cold breeze, sharp and unnerving, sweeping across the deck. I looked around. The air had grown heavier, the sounds of the ship's movement more pronounced, like it was groaning under some unseen weight. I brushed it off as just a sudden gust of wind. After all, I was on the open sea now, far from land, where things like this were bound to happen. Still, something inside me couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place than met the eye. Maybe it was just nerves or excitement, who knows? But something about this ship, something wasn't right. I headed back inside, trying to focus on the fun I'd planned for the next few days. The dinner, the entertainment, the port stops. But as the ship began to sail deeper into the vast ocean, I couldn't shake the sense that I was not alone on this journey. That somehow this ship had a story, one that no one was telling. And I was about to find out what it was. The ship was alive with excitement as the first night on board began. Passengers filled the dining room, chatting and laughing over glasses of wine. The ship's crew moved with practiced ease, delivering food and drinks, guiding guests to their tables. The atmosphere felt light and carefree, but a small part of me still couldn't shake the unease I'd felt earlier. It wasn't as if something specific was wrong, just a strange nagging feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just the excitement of being on a new adventure. I sat at a table near the window, the vast ocean stretching out beyond the glass. The sky had darkened to a deep blue, the stars twinkling brightly. Above, I had barely touched my meal, distracted by the faint whisper of voices coming from the far end of the room. At first, I thought it was just the usual noise of a crowded dining hall, but it wasn't like the chatter of other passengers. This was different, softer, almost as if people were speaking in low tones, just beyond the reach of my hearing. Glanced around, trying to see where the voices were coming from, but no one else seemed to notice. I shook my head, blaming it on the hum of the ship's engines or perhaps just my overactive imagination. I turned my attention back to my meal, but the whispers didn't stop. They were still there, quiet but persistent. When I looked back toward the far corner of the room, I caught sight of something that made my heart skip a beat. There, in the shadows near the door, was a figure, just standing there, unmoving. At first, I thought it was a crew member, maybe one of the waiters, but then I noticed something strange. The figure was too still, too silent. I blinked, trying to focus, but in that moment, the figure seemed to disappear, vanishing like a wisp of smoke. I blinked again. It was gone. I was left with only the sensation that something had been there, something watching. I quickly looked around the room, trying to find some explanation. The other diners were talking, unaware, enjoying their meals, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just seen someone who didn't belong. I tried to brush it off, but the unease returned, stronger than before. I excused myself and went back to my cabin. As I walked down the long corridor to my room, I noticed something strange. The hallway was unusually quiet. Normally, there would be the hum of distant voices, the sound of doors opening and closing, but it was silent, too silent. My footsteps echoed off the walls, and the air felt colder than it had earlier in the day. The ship seemed to have grown, stiller, more isolated. When I reached my cabin, I hesitated before opening the door. Something about the moment felt too heavy, like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite understand. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was just as I left it, tidy, untouched. But as I moved towards the bed to pull back the covers, I noticed something that made my heart race. The television was on. It was playing static, just a screen full of white noise. I stared at it, confused. I was sure I had turned it off earlier. I crossed the room to switch it off, but before I could reach the remote, the static stopped. The screen flickered for a moment and then changed. For a split second, I saw a dark shape standing in the shadows of the cabin. Then it was gone. The screen went back to static. I stood frozen, staring at the television, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. There was no one in the room, no one in the cabin. But somehow, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was here, someone had been here, and not just anyone. This felt different, like something or someone was trying to make themselves known. I quickly turned off the TV and jumped into bed, pulling the covers tightly around me. I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would take over and that the feeling would pass. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. The ship was vast, but it felt too quiet, too alone, like it was hiding something just beneath its surface. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for me to uncover it. Somewhere, out there on the endless ocean, I was not alone. The night dragged on, and sleep came in short, uneasy bursts. Every creak of the ship felt louder than usual, and every ripple of water against the hull seemed to echo in my mind. I kept waking up, heart racing, staring into the darkness. It was as if the ship itself had become a part of my dreams, or maybe it was the other way around. The quiet whispers I had heard earlier at dinner still echoed in my ears, and no matter how hard I tried to shake them off, they lingered. By morning, the sense of unease hadn't left. It was worse, in fact. I felt as though I were being watched, not by a person, but by something else. Something that existed between the cracks of reality, just out of sight, but always there. The ship seemed to hum with it, an energy I couldn't explain. like the air was thick with a presence that had been here long before I ever boarded. I decided to leave my cabin and explore the ship, hoping the fresh air and activity would clear my head. I walked along the deck, trying to push the strange feeling aside. Passengers were laughing, chatting, enjoying the sunshine. The ship was moving smoothly through the open sea, and everything looked normal. The ocean stretched out in all directions, vast and endless. Yet, as I glanced toward the horizon, a chill crept up my spine. The water, for some reason, seemed darker today, almost unnaturally so. It was as if the ocean itself were hiding something beneath its surface. I shook my head. I was letting my imagination run wild. I decided to head toward the lounge, hoping a coffee would calm my nerves. But as I walked inside, I was struck by the strange atmosphere. The lounge, usually full of conversation and laughter, was eerily empty. There were a few people scattered around, but their faces were tense, their eyes darting nervously around the room. I couldn't help but notice that the waitstaff seemed a little off. They were moving quickly, almost too quickly, with tight smiles plastered on their faces. But there was something in their eyes that wasn't right, something hollow. I sat at the bar, ordering a coffee, and tried to ignore the feeling growing inside me. Maybe it was the isolation, or maybe it was the stories I had overheard about. The ships passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a history here, something buried beneath the polished floors and gleaming windows. I had heard the older passengers whispering about strange occurrences, but whenever I tried to ask, they quickly changed the subject. The bartender, a man with graying hair and a stiff smile, placed my coffee in front of me. His hands were trembling slightly as he slid the cup over, and I noticed that his shirt was soaked with sweat, despite the cool air conditioning in the lounge. I gave him a polite smile, but he didn't respond. He simply turned away and walked briskly back to the counter, his eyes never meeting mine. I took a sip of my coffee, trying to distract myself, but the unease still gnawed at me. I tried to focus on the passengers around me, on their chatter, on their laughter, but it all felt distant, hollow. And then I heard it again, that faint whispering sound. It was just barely audible, but I could swear it was coming from the back of the lounge. I turned my head quickly, expecting to see someone speaking, but the room was empty. My stomach twisted. No one else seemed to hear it. I stood up abruptly, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there, needed to escape this growing feeling that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I walked out onto the deck, desperate for some fresh air, but the moment I stepped outside, the wind hit me like a wall. It wasn't the usual ocean breeze. It felt colder, sharper, almost unnatural. And then I saw it at the far end of the deck. Just beyond the railing, there was a figure standing in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another passenger. But there was something about the way the person was standing too still, too rigid. And then, as if sensing my gaze, the figure slowly turned its head toward me. I froze. The figure's face was blurred, its features indistinct. I couldn't make out whether it was a man or a woman, young or old, but the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a step back, unable to look away. For a moment, we just stood there, locked in an unspoken exchange. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air. I blinked, and the deck was empty again. My stomach lurched, and I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. The wind was still howling, the sea still stretching out endlessly before me, but everything felt off, unnervingly off. I had to get back to my cabin. I had to get away from whatever it was that was lurking on this ship. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, and I knew that something was hiding in plain sight. Something that no one was talking about. The ship had a secret, and I was getting closer to it. The moment I stepped back into my cabin, I locked the door behind me with trembling hands. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the ship itself was pressing in on me. The strange figure I had seen, or thought I had seen, still lingered in my mind. Had it been a trick of the light? A hallucination from too much stress? Maybe I had just let my imagination get the best of me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was off with the SS Meridian. I couldn't explain it, but the ship felt like it was hiding a dark secret, one it didn't want anyone to uncover. The whispers, the figures that seemed to disappear into thin air, it was all too real. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far bigger than I could comprehend. I sat on the bed, trying to calm myself, but the more I thought about it, the worse it got. I remembered hearing those hushed conversations between passengers the night before. They'd spoken of missing people, of strange occurrences that had happened on the ship over the years. I had dismissed them then as mere rumors, but now I wasn't so sure. What if they were true? The ship had been built years ago, and over the decades, several accidents and disappearances had occurred, some mysterious, some tragic. But the crew always seemed to sweep it under the rug, acting like it was nothing more than bad luck. No one ever talked about it openly, and yet there was always this sense of unease among the crew. They acted nervous, stiff, as if they knew something they weren't sharing. I needed answers. I grabbed my jacket and left the cabin, determined to get to the bottom of this. The hallways were still eerily quiet, and as I passed by a few cabins, I noticed the same strange atmosphere. Hushed voices, the unusual silence. Even the passengers seemed different, now more reserved, less carefree. I made my way toward the ship's main lounge. There was a man sitting at the bar, an older gentleman who had been on board when I first arrived. I had seen him talking to a crew member earlier. He looked like he knew the ship's history better than most, and I felt a strange pull to talk to him. When I approached, he looked up at me with tired eyes, his expression both cautious and knowing. "You're the new passenger, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. I nodded. "Yeah, I was wondering about something. I heard people talk about the ship, about some accidents that happened over the years. What's going on here?" He took a long sip of his drink before answering. "You don't want to know," he said quietly. "Not if you want to get off this ship in one piece." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a reason why the crew's so nervous. There's a reason why everyone acts like nothing ever happens. People disappear here, people just vanish, and no one talks about it. But it's happened before, and it'll happen again." My heart began to race. What happened to them? Where do they go? The man shook his head, looking over his shoulder nervously, as though expecting someone to overhear. "I don't know. No one knows, but I've seen it. I've seen the things that happen in the dark corners of this ship. And I've heard the stories, the ones that get swept under the rug." I leaned in closer, my curiosity getting the better of me. "Tell me what you know, please." He looked at me for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. "The ship, it's cursed. Not in the way people think, but in a way that can't be explained. You see, there's this part of the ship, hidden, away from the passengers. Eyes, it's called the lower deck, but no one is allowed down there, ever, they say. People who go down there, they don't come back the same, or they don't come back at all." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, don't come back the same?" The man lowered his voice even further. "They change. There's something down there, something in the belly of the ship. It's old, it's ancient, and it doesn't like to be disturbed. The people who go down there, they get lost. Not physically, but mentally. They start hearing voices. They start seeing things. It gets into their heads, into their souls. And once it's in you, it never lets go." I took a step back, my mind racing. What happens to them? He paused, looking at me with a mix of pity and fear. "They disappear. And when they do, the ship acts like nothing happened. Like they were never there at all. Like they never existed." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "And you think that's what happened to the others?" He nodded, his face grave. "I know it's true. I've been on this ship long enough to see it for myself. And now I can feel it. I can feel it calling to you." I looked at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. But deep down I knew. Something on this ship, something hidden, something ancient was pulling me in. And now there was no turning back. I couldn't shake the man's words from my mind. As I walked back to my cabin, every step felt heavier, as if the ship itself were pulling me deeper into its grasp. The walls seemed to close in on me, the narrow hallways longer than usual. The chill in the air felt sharper, more oppressive, as though something unseen was pressing against me from every side. The low deck, that was where it all started, the place I couldn't stop thinking about. There was something there, something ancient, and I knew, deep down, that I had to see it for myself. I had to know what the crew was so afraid of, what everyone was trying to hide. Night had fallen, and the ship was quieter now. Most of the passengers were in the lounges or their rooms. The lights above me flickered for a moment, and I found myself hesitating. It was like my body was trying to warn me, telling me to turn back, but the pull of the lower deck was stronger than the fear. I moved toward the back of the ship, where I knew the narrow stairwell was hidden behind an old wooden door. The air was thicker here, colder. The soft hum of the ship's engines faded as I reached the door. There were no guards, no crew members in sight. I quickly unlocked the door, just as I had planned, and stepped into the dark hallway that led down into the depths of the ship. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step sounding unnaturally loud in the dead silence. The chill in the air grew more intense as I went deeper. I could feel the temperature drop with every step, and the smell down here was damp, musty like old, forgotten places. The walls seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing longer. The further I went down at the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. The hallway stretched before me, dark and empty. I could hear nothing except the pounding of my own heart. And then, just as I was about to move forward, I heard its soft whispers. At first, it was so faint that I thought I imagined it. But then, the words became clearer, and I realized the whispers were coming from further down the hall. I froze. The voices weren't human, not completely. They were too distorted, too eerie. They seemed to call out, beckoning me closer. "Come closer." The words slithered through the air, sending a cold shiver down my spine. I should have turned around then, should have run back up the stairs, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I had to know what it was. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me deeper into the darkness. The walls in this part of the ship were lined with old, cracked mirrors. Some were framed, others were just large glass panels set into the walls. As I walked past them, I noticed that some of them were distorted, the reflections warped, as if the glass was trying to hide something beneath its surface. My reflection, too, seemed to shift and bend in the dim light. I stopped in front of one of the mirrors. My face looked different in it, the shadows in the reflection seeming darker, the contours of my features somehow off. As I stared at myself, the whispers grew louder, as though they were coming from the glass itself. My breath caught in my throat, and then I saw it, a figure standing behind me in the mirror. I whirled around, my heart racing. There was no one there. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, tall, dark, almost blending into the shadows. I couldn't make out any features, only the shape of a person, standing motionless, staring at me. I backed away from the mirror, my body frozen with fear. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. They were no longer calling me, they were warning. "May, turn back," they whispered. "You shouldn't be here. Leave now." But I couldn't leave. The pull was too strong. The fear and the curiosity, all mixed together, were making me stay. I stepped forward, almost against my will, and moved deeper into the lower deck. The hallway twisted, curving around corners that shouldn't have been there. It felt like the ship was alive, its very structure shifting, warping as I moved through it. The whispers were getting more frantic, now accompanied by soft, eerie scratching noises, like nails against wood. The air was growing thicker, and with every step, I felt as though I were moving through something that was no longer part of the world I knew. I reached the end of the hall, where a heavy wooden door stood ajar. A low, mournful sound came from inside, almost like a moan. I didn't know if it was coming from the ship itself or from something inside the room, but the sound stopped me in my tracks. The door creaked open as I pushed it. Inside the room was small, dark, and filled with a strange, musty scent. And then I saw it. In the center of the room stood an old mirror, its frame carved with intricate designs that were half erased by time. It looked ancient, out of place in a modern ship, and the whispers, they were coming from this mirror. I couldn't look away. My feet carried me closer, and as I peered into the glass, I saw something move. For a split second I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then I saw it again. A figure, blurry and out of focus, moving inside the reflection. It was a person, a man. His face was distorted, his features stretched and twisted into something unrecognizable. His eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to pull me in. The figure reached out from the mirror, his hand sliding toward me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, but the mirror was pulling me in. I couldn't look away, couldn't move. My body froze, as if trapped in place by an invisible force. Whispers were deafening now, all around me, swirling in my ears. They weren't speaking anymore. They were screaming, "You shouldn't be here, ... And then the mirror cracked. A jagged line ran across its surface, and the figure inside it twisted violently, its form contorting and stretching. My breath hitched, and I backed away, but the mirror pulled me in, its reflection growing more distorted with every second. The last thing I saw was the figure's outstretched hand reaching toward me before the world around me went black. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying on the cold, hard floor of the lower deck. My head was throbbing, and my body felt heavy, as if I had been pulled through the depths of the ship itself. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the world around me was a blur. For a few seconds, I thought I had imagined it all, the whispers, the mirror, the figure. But as I blinked away the haze, I realized it was all real. I was still in the lower deck. The air was thick, suffocating, and the faint scent of mildew and decay lingered in the corners of the room. I pushed myself to my feet, my knees shaky, my mind racing. The ship's lights flickered above me, casting strange shadows against the walls. The silence was deafening, but there was something beneath it, something alive, waiting. I reached for my phone, only to find it missing. Panic set in as I realized I was completely alone, without any way to contact anyone. My heart pounded in my chest, and I tried to steady myself. I needed to leave this place. I needed to get back to my cabin and forget any of this had ever happened. But I couldn't. The pull was still there, gnawing me, urging me deeper into the bowels of the ship. I stumbled through the corridor, my legs unsteady beneath me. I had to get out, but the more I moved, the more I felt like I was walking in circles. The layout of the lower deck was impossible. It didn't make sense. There were no signs, no markers, and the walls felt as though they were closing in, shifting like the ship itself was alive, twisting with every step I took. And then I heard it again. The whispers. This time, they were louder, clearer, and they were coming from all directions. They surrounded me, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the voices weren't coming from the mirrors anymore. They were coming from the walls themselves. "Get out. Leave this place." I turned around, but there was no one there. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, the shadows reaching for me like long, grasping fingers. I was trapped, and then something shifted. The very air seemed to ripple, and the floor beneath my feet trembled. I looked up, my eyes wide with fear, as the walls began to warp and change. The corridors around me began to look less like a ship and more like something else. Something ancient. The lights above flickered violently before plunging me into darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled to pull out my phone, hoping for some kind of light, but there was nothing. I was left alone in the blackness, the silence broken only by the faint sound of scratching like nails against wood. Slow and deliberate. The scratching grew louder, closer. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't obey. The ship felt like it was breathing, the very walls exhaling in and out, as though it was alive, watching. And then, a shadow passed by me. I froze, the blood draining from my face. There was something moving in the darkness with me. I could feel it, the coldness in the air, the presence that was just beyond my reach. I turned my head quickly, but the shadow was gone. I couldn't breathe. I backed into a wall, desperate for something solid to hold on to. The whispers were getting louder, overlapping, all calling my name now. They sounded like the voices of the missing passengers, people who had disappeared from the ship without a trace. Their voices, their cries for help, mingled with the whispers. Please, help me. I had to move. I had to get out of here. I forced myself to run, the walls closing in around me, the shadows seeming to reach out to pull me back into their depths. The ship's heartbeat echoed through the metal halls, and I could hear something following me. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, but far too heavy to be human. I turned a corner, nearly tripping over my own feet, and found myself face to face with another door. It was an old, rusted door, tucked away at the end of the hallway. The air around it felt different, colder, and I could swear I saw something move behind the cracks in the wood. I tried the door handle. It was locked. Panic surged through me as I rattled it, but then, to my shock, it slowly creaked open on its own. The space beyond was pitch black. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening thud. The darkness inside was suffocating. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The silence pressed in on me, and for a moment, I thought I was alone. But then I heard something. A whisper. It was closer now. So close, I could feel it brushing against my ear. It's too late. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The air around me was still, and yet it felt charged with an unnatural energy. And then, I saw it. In the distance, barely visible. In the darkness was a figure. At first, I thought it was just another shadow, but as I squinted, I saw the figure move toward me. It was tall, too tall, its shape distorted and inhuman. The closer it came, the more its features twisted, becoming less recognizable. It was a figure of pure darkness, no face, just an absence of light. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the dark. The figure stopped in front of me. I could feel the coldness radiating off it, the intense, suffocating cold that seemed to freeze my very soul. And then, the figure reached out. You shouldn't have come. The words were not spoken aloud, but felt as if they came from within me, a voice I could feel inside my mind, piercing, cold. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps, but the figure didn't move. It stood there, watching me with empty, soulless eyes, as if it had been waiting for me. Then, in an instant, everything went dark, completely dark. The last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was the sound of the ship's engine grinding to a halt, followed by a deafening silence. The world around me disappeared, and I was left in a void, a place with no light, no sound, no escape. When I woke up, it felt like I was floating. The air was thick and heavy, and there was a strange sensation in the pit of my stomach, like I was still moving still on the ship, but something was terribly wrong. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt glued shut. The darkness was absolute, and the weight of the silence pressed on me from all sides. It wasn't until I reached out with my hand that I realized I wasn't alone. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, like metal, but it didn't feel like the walls of the ship. The surface was slick and strange, as if it were part of the ship itself, but not a part I'd ever seen before. I slowly forced my eyes open, but the world around me remained an endless void. No walls, no floor, no ceiling, just nothingness. And then I saw it, a glimmer, far in the distance, like the faintest flicker of light. It was too far to be a part of the ship, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was calling to me. I reached out, my body still weak, but my mind sharper than ever. Something was different now. The air tasted sour, and the darkness felt thick. The whispers were gone, but there was an underlying hum that I could feel vibrating in my bones. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I realized that whatever I was feeling, whatever, was pulling me toward that distant light, was something I shouldn't be approaching, but I couldn't stop myself. I began to move toward the light, each step dragging me further into the void. The surface beneath me seemed to change as I walked, shifting from solid to liquid and back again. It was like I was walking on a never-ending sea, the ground beneath me undulating with every step. The sensation was nauseating, as if the ship itself had turned into a living thing, breathing and shifting beneath my feet. As I got closer, the light grew brighter. It was a soft, glowing hue, a strange, otherworldly color that I couldn't quite place. The closer I got, the more intense the hum became, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. It felt like my very body was resonating with the ship's pulse, and the closer I got to the light, the more my own heartbeat seemed to sync with it. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Faces, dozens of them, hundreds maybe. There, eyes wide and vacant, staring into the void, their faces contorted in silent screams. Their features were blurred, like they were drowning in the very air around them. The faces were trapped inside the walls of the ship, their expressions frozen in terror. I couldn't look away. My feet moved toward the light, but my eyes were drawn to the faces. They were begging, their lips moving, but no sound coming from them. Their eyes seemed to follow me, pleading for help, but the more I looked, the clearer it became. They weren't asking for help, they were warning me. The light was almost blinding now. I was standing at the edge of a vast, open space. I could feel the pull, the gravity of it, dragging me forward. It was like the ship itself had become a living thing, and the light was its heart. It was the source of all of it, the whispers, the strange coldness, the distorted reflections, everything. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the light. In an instant, everything around me changed. The world didn't shift. It collapsed. Walls of the ship dissolved, the corridors, the lower deck, everything around me vanished into thin air. I was no longer in the ship, but I wasn't anywhere else either. The void stretched out endless around me, with the faces still lingering in the shadows, their hollow eyes staring at me from every direction. And then, in the midst of it all, I saw him. The figure, the one from the mirror, the one who had followed me, who had watched me. He was standing in front of me now, his distorted face visible for the first time. It was not a face at all. It was a mask, a grotesque, hollow mask, with hollow eyes and a mouth that didn't move. His body was like a shadow, shifting and warping with the light. He was no longer human, but something older. Something ancient. You shouldn't have come, the figure spoke, but the words didn't come from his mouth. They were inside my mind, echoing in my skull like 1,000 voices. The voice was deep, hollow, like it came from the bottom of the ocean. And then, just as I thought I might collapse, as I thought I might drown in the void, the figure reached out to touch me. You were never meant to escape. Before I could react, everything went black again, and the last thing I felt was the cold. The freezing, unrelenting cold. When I woke up again, I was lying in my bed in my cabin. The ship was still moving, the lights still flickering above me. But everything felt different. The air was heavy, and I felt the weight of it on my chest, as though I were carrying the entire ship on my back. I sat up, my heart racing, but there was no mirror, no shadow, no figure. Just the quiet hum of the ship and the distant sounds of passengers going about their day. I glanced at the clock. It was still night, but something was wrong. I could feel it deep in my gut. I wasn't alone. The whispers hadn't gone away. They were still with me, and they would never leave. And somewhere, deep within the bowels of the ship, the figure still waited. Asterisk. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned a corner, I felt eyes on me. Every time I passed a mirror, I couldn't help but glance into it, expecting to see something, or someone looking back at me. But there was nothing, just my own reflection, looking more and more disheveled each time. I tried to go about my day, to act normal. The passengers were all chatting in the lounge, the crew was busy, and the ship continued its steady journey through the water. But I felt like I was living in a dream or a nightmare, where everything seemed real but was somehow off, distorted in a way that was impossible to explain. I tried to reach out to the ship's staff, but each time I tried, they would brush me off with a smile, as if nothing was wrong. They didn't know what I had seen, what I had experienced. They didn't hear the whispers, or feel the air shift every time I passed a hallway. I had to find someone who would listen to me, someone who could help me understand what was happening. I decided to talk to Sarah. She was a crew member, and although she seemed nervous when I brought up the subject of the lower deck, I could tell she knew more than she was letting on. But when I found her in the mess hall, she was acting strangely. Her eyes were wide, her hands trembling as she cleaned the tables. She wouldn't meet my gaze, and when I asked her about the lower deck, her expression darkened. I can't talk about it," she whispered, glancing nervously around. "You shouldn't go there. It's forbidden." I leaned closer, my voice barely a whisper. "But I've been there. Something happened to me." She froze, her face going pale. She looked over her shoulder again, then pulled me into a quiet corner. Her voice dropped to a near inaudible murmur. "I've heard stories. Stories of people who went to the lower deck and never came back. The ones who did, they changed. They're never the same again. The ship, it's not what you think. It's not just a cruise. It's a prison. A prison for things that were never meant to be freed." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, looking terrified, as if she was afraid to say. "Too much. I can't explain it, not here. But if you want to understand, you have to go to the heart of the ship. The engine room." The words, "the heart of the ship," echoed in my mind. Sarah's face hardened, as if she had made a decision. "I'll meet you after midnight. The engine room is where it all begins, and where it ends." I couldn't sleep that night. The shadows in my cabin felt heavier, and the whispers were louder. Every creak of the ship sent a jolt through my body, and every flash of light that flickered above seemed to send a warning signal to my brain. I was waiting for midnight, waiting to find out the truth about this cursed ship. When the clock finally struck 12, I slipped out of my cabin, the cold air biting at my skin as I made my way toward the lower deck. The ship's corridors were eerily quiet at this hour. The only sounds were the distant hum of the engine and the occasional shuffle of the crew in their quarters. As I descended deeper into the ship, the air grew colder. The light above flickered with each step I took, casting long shadows on the walls. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if alive. The further I went, the heavier the atmosphere became, until it felt like something was pressing in on me from all sides. When I reached the engine room, I saw Sarah standing in front of a massive metal door. She looked as though she had aged years in the short time since we last spoke. Her eyes were wide, haunted, and I could see her hands trembling. clinging to a flashlight as if it were her only source of protection. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what we would find behind that door, but I had to know. I had to know the truth. With a deep breath, Sarah unlocked the door, and we stepped inside. The engine room was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was dark, filled with massive machinery, and the air smelled of oil and rust. The room was vast, stretching far into the darkness. The lights flickered above, casting long, menacing shadows across the room. The humming sound from the ship's engines was louder here, almost deafening, like the pulse of some enormous creature. I could feel it, the heartbeat of the ship dot, as Sarah led the way through the room. I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that didn't look human, etched into the metal, as if carved by something ancient. Some of them glowed faintly, a dull green light that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the ship itself. "This is where it all began," Sarah said, her voice barely audible above the hum of the machinery. "This is where the ship was built, where it was crafted to keep them contained." I stared at her, confusion and fear mounting in my chest. "Who? What do you mean?" She stopped, turning toward me with a grim expression. "The ship wasn't always a cruise liner. It was once a prison, a floating tomb, designed to keep something inside, something dangerous, and now it's awake." Before I could ask her what she meant, a cold gust of wind blew through the room, and the lights above flickered one last time. I heard a clicking sound, like metal scraping against metal. Sarah's face went white. "It's too late. They know we're here." I felt it then. The air grew still, the hum of the engine stopping abruptly. And then the darkness seemed to close. In around us, dot from the shadows, something moved. A figure, a shadow, stretching and shifting in the corners of the room. It was not human. Its shape was wrong, distorted, like a nightmare come to life. Dot, and then I heard it, the whisper that had been following me since the lower deck. "Welcome back." Before I could react, the figure lunged forward, and the darkness swallowed us whole. The world went completely dark. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was still on the ship. The air felt different, thicker, colder, almost suffocating. My body was frozen, as though it had become part of the darkness itself. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the darkness lifted. I blinked, and when my eyes adjusted to the faint glow around me, I realized I was no longer in the engine room. I was in a place that felt wrong. The walls were covered in dark, cracked stone, and the air reeked of decay. There were no windows, no doors, just endless corridors stretching in every direction, each one darker and narrower than the last. The ground beneath me was cold and damp, and I could feel the weight of something ancient pressing against me. I spun around, searching for Sarah, but she was gone. I was alone. My heart pounded in my chest. Where was I? What had just happened? And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, the kind of sound that comes from something not quite human. It echoed in the darkness, reverberating through the stone walls. I froze. The sound was coming closer, and I could feel it vibrating through the floor. Deep into my bones, I ran. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I just ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, not with that thing getting closer. I ran for what felt like hours. The walls blurred around me, the darkness pressing in on all sides, but I couldn't stop. My breathing was shallow, my body drenched in sweat, and my mind was racing. But then, suddenly, I hit a wall. I didn't see it coming. One moment, I was running full speed ahead, and the next, I slammed into the cold, unforgiving surface. My head hit the stone with a sickening crack, and I stumbled back, disoriented, clutching my forehead. That's when I saw it. A door. A single wooden door. the end of the hallway. It wasn't like the others, it was old worn, but it had a faint glowing symbol carved into the wood. The symbol was the same as the ones I had seen in the engine room. The same eerie green glow. Without thinking, I stumbled toward it, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I twisted it, and the door creaked open. I stepped inside. The room was small, barely more than a closet, but it was different from the corridors outside. The air inside was still. It was like time itself had stopped in this place. And there, in the center of the room, was a mirror. The glass was cracked, covered in grime, but I could still make out my reflection, my pale face, wide eyes, and ragged breath. I stepped closer, mesmerized by the mirror's strange glow, as if it were pulling me in, calling me. Then, a movement in the glass. I jerked back, my breath catching in my throat. For a second, I thought I had seen someone standing behind me. I whipped around, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, the reflection was different. It wasn't me anymore. It was Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She was mouthing something, but no sound came out. Her lips were moving in silent screams, her hands pressed against the glass as if trying to reach me. Her eyes were full of panic, as though she knew something terrible was about to happen. I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing against the cold glass. As soon as my fingers made contact, the room seemed to shake. The lights flickered, and the hum of the ship returned, louder than before. And then, the shadow from earlier appeared again, but this time it was closer. It wasn't just a figure. It was seething, moving like smoke, like a mass of shadows that bent and twisted unnaturally. The growl was louder now, and I could feel its presence behind me, its eyes watching me from the dark. I turned to face it. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was familiar now, the same voice I had heard in the mirror. It was inside my mind, echoing through my skull. Suddenly, everything shifted. The walls seemed to close in on me, the ceiling bending downward. The ship groaned, the metal creaking, as though the entire vessel was alive and it was angry. The lights overhead flashed wildly, flickering between shadows and light, until all I could see was darkness. The shadow lunged forward, its form shifting and growing larger by the second. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, like it was caught in some trap, unable to escape. I reached for the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang, locking me inside the small room. The shadow loomed closer, its distorted form coming into focus. It was them, the lost souls. The ones I had seen trapped in the walls of the ship. They were now coming for me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The last thing I heard was the whispering, the voice that had followed me from the very beginning. It wasn't just one voice now. It was a chorus, all the voices of the souls trapped in the ship, echoing through my mind. "Welcome to your end." And then everything went black. I didn't know how long I had been unconscious. Time felt like it had ceased to exist in that place. But when I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a cold, damp room. My body felt heavy, like I was submerged in water, but the air around me was too thin to breathe properly. My head throbbed with pain. I could feel a strange, icy chill creeping into my bones, as though I had been lying in the deepest, darkest part of the ocean. The walls around me were the same worn stone, and the floor was slick with moisture. The dim light above flickered, sporadically casting long, unsettling shadows that danced and twisted along the walls. I wasn't alone. I could feel the presence in the room, something watching, something waiting. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively pressed myself against the cold, damp floor, my hands searching the ground for something to hold on to. That's when I noticed it, a pair of eyes. They were not human. They were wide, black, and empty, set deep into the wall across from me. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, but they were staring directly at me, hollow and unblinking, like they were part of the very stone itself. The shadows around the eyes seemed to pulse like the walls were breathing, exhaling an ancient, suffocating weight. I tried to scream, but the sound was stuck in my throat. That's when I realized I couldn't move. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper. The air around me felt heavy, like it was suffocating me, binding me in place. It was like the very ship itself had become a prison, and I was nothing more than a caged animal, waiting for my fate to be sealed. I could hear the whispering again, but it wasn't just one voice now, it was many. It was a chorus of voices, hollow, distorted, and full of pain. The voices seemed to come from all directions, swirling around me like a storm. Help us, escape. Don't stay, don't look back. You are the last to know. Each voice felt like it was being drawn out of the walls, as though the ship itself was speaking, its pulse echoing in my ears. The chill in the room deepened, and I could feel it seeping into my skin, freezing my very soul. And then there was a sound of scraping, like nails dragging across metal. I turned toward it, and my heart stopped. There, at the edge of the room, I saw a shadow dot. It was moving, stretching and twisting unnaturally, pulling itself along the ground like a liquid. The shape was vague at first, but as it came closer, I could make out its form, a tall, thin figure, its limbs stretched impossibly long, its body hunched and crooked. I recognized it immediately. The figure, the one from the mirror, the one I had seen in the darkened hallways of the ship. The shadow seemed to know me. Its eyes locked onto mine with a malevolent gaze. It moved toward me slowly, methodically, as though it had all the time in the world. The scraping grew louder, the sound grating against my nerves. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My muscles were frozen, paralyzed by the suffocating fear that was creeping through my veins. The shadow was closing in, and with each step, I felt the weight of its presence growing heavier. And then, in a split second, it was right in front of me. I felt its cold breath on my face, and its eyes, those dark, empty eyes, were inches away. From mine, it didn't speak, didn't make a sound. It just stared, and I felt my mind begin to unravel, the fear clawing at my sanity, tearing it apart. I was no longer sure if I was still on the ship, or if I was trapped somewhere else somewhere. Beyond time, beyond reality. But just as I thought I might lose my mind, the figure reached out toward me. Its long, twisted fingers brushed against my skin, and a sharp pain shot through my chest, like ice piercing my very soul. But instead of pulling away, I did something I hadn't expected. I reached out toward it. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the sheer desperation to end this nightmare. Or maybe it was because, somewhere deep down, I knew that there was no escaping this. No escape from the ship. No escape from the curse. The moment my fingers touched its cold, lifeless hand, I felt an explosion of energy, an overwhelming force that surged through me. It was as if the ship itself had come alive, pulling everything into one singular point. The walls around me shifted, the air crackling with static. And then, in a split second, everything stopped. The shadows vanished. The whispers ceased. The chill that had consumed me lifted. I was standing in the middle of the engine room once again. The ship was still moving, but it was as if nothing had ever happened. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, all were solid. But I wasn't the same. The weight of what I had seen, what I had felt, still pressed down on me. I could still hear the faint hum of the ship, but it wasn't the same. It felt different now, darker, older. And then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The reflection in the mirror wasn't mine anymore. It was someone else's. Someone who looked just like me. But their eyes, they were empty. And in their eyes, I could see the reflection of a ship, one that was alive. I staggered back, my heart pounding in my chest. My eyes locked onto the reflection of myself, but it wasn't me, not really. The figure in the mirror was hollow, its eyes vacant and devoid of life. The air around me felt thicker, like I was no longer in control of my own body. Something had changed, something fundamental had broken, and I was no longer the person I thought I was. I didn't want to look at the mirror any longer, but I couldn't help it. My feet moved on their own, a cord dragging me closer, as if the reflection was calling to me, drawing me in. The reflection in the mirror began to shift. Slowly, a new shape began to form, a new figure beside me, mirroring my every move. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, some hallucination brought on by my overwhelming fear and exhaustion. But then, I heard a whisper. "You can't escape." The voice was mine, my own voice, but it was distorted, twisted. It echoed through my skull, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from within the mirror itself. I blinked, trying to make sense of what was happening, but when I looked back, the reflection was different. My image was no longer alone. Another figure stood next to me in the mirror, a tall, twisted version of myself. Its eyes were pitch black, empty voids that seemed to pull me in. It moved. I tried to back away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my gaze from the mirror. The figure in the reflection stretched its hand toward me, its long, bony fingers reaching out. "Join us." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if something inside me had cracked open. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, and I could taste the metallic tang of fear on my tongue. My body finally started to move, but not in the way I intended. My hand reached out toward the mirror on its own, as if controlled by some unseen force. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to fall into whatever dark abyss the mirror promised. But I couldn't stop myself. Just as my fingers grazed the cold, reflective surface, I felt an icy shock run through my entire body. A vision flashed before my eyes. I saw myself, only it wasn't me anymore. It was a shadow of who I used to be, a version of me that had been consumed by the ship, by whatever cursed force haunted this vessel. I saw myself standing in the same place, but everything around me was distorted. The walls were collapsing, the ship was breaking apart, and the people who had once been passengers now moved like lost souls. Their eyes vacant, their bodies decayed. The vision shifted. I was standing on the deck of the ship, staring out at the endless ocean, but there was something wrong with the water. It was black, inky, dark, with a surface that seemed to churn and twist, as if it had a life of its own. In the distance, I saw the silhouette of something moving beneath the surface. Something massive and ancient. The figure in the reflection smiled. And then, the vision faded. I blinked rapidly, gasping for air. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The reflection in the mirror was back to normal, or as normal as it could be. But I could feel something deep inside me had changed. The ship had marked me. It had claimed me. The whispering started again, soft at first, but growing. Louder, more insistent. "It's too late. You belong to us now." I stepped away from the mirror, my legs shaky, my mind spinning. But as I turned to leave the engine room, something stopped me. I heard a door creak open. From the corner of my eye, I saw it, Sarah, but she was no longer the person I had met. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something empty. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. She walked toward me, her movements slow and stiff, like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. "Sarah?" My voice cracked as I took a hesitant step toward her. "What's happening? What have I become?" She didn't respond. She simply stared, her eyes fixed on mine, her body still and lifeless. And then, I saw it, the mark on her arm, a strange symbol, glowing faintly with that same eerie green light. It was the same symbol I had seen etched into the walls of the lower deck and in the engine room. It was a symbol of possession, a mark that meant she was no longer herself, she was one of them. But it wasn't just Sarah. I turned and saw them, others emerging from the shadows, passengers, crew members. Each one of them had the same vacant, hollow look in their eyes. Each one of them had that same glowing mark on their arms, and in the distance, I could hear it, the rumble of the ship, louder now, vibrating beneath my feet. It wasn't the engines anymore. It was something else, Dot. It was the heartbeat of the ship. You're one of us now. The words echoed in my mind as I felt the presence closing in on me. The shadowed figures were surrounding me, their eyes blank and lifeless, their forms shifting in and out of focus. There was no escape. There never had been. And just like that, the ship claimed another soul. The last thing I saw before the darkness consumed me was the faint glow of that green symbol, burning into my mind, marking me for eternity. The ship had won. I don't know how much time passed. It could have been hours, or it could have been days. Everything felt distorted, like I was caught in some endless loop, trapped in the spaces between the moments. The world around me seemed to blur, but deep. Down I felt the pull of the ship's call, dragging me deeper into its dark heart. When I finally regained awareness, I was standing in a narrow hallway, the same haunting corridor I had seen before. The walls were covered in grime, the air stale and cold. The ship felt alive, its pulse thumping under my feet, its breath vibrating in the walls. I was no longer alone. The shadows of the other passengers, those who had been claimed, moved slowly around me, their eyes vacant, their limbs stiff and jerky. It was like they were all sleepwalking, drifting in and out of consciousness, lost in the endless void of the ship. But their eyes, those lifeless eyes, all watched me, following my every movement. I felt the weight of their gaze, and it made me sick to my stomach. "You're here now, too." The voice came from behind me. It was a familiar voice, soft and soothing, but also dead. I turned, and there she was. Sarah. Her face was pale, her skin grayish and cold. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, wild and tangled, and her eyes were just like everyone else's, empty. She didn't smile, didn't move, but she was there, watching. I wanted to scream, to shake her awake, but I couldn't. I didn't want this. Her voice cracked, a hollow echo. I didn't want to become one of them. Her words were chilling. It was like she was trapped in the same nightmare, just like me. We were no longer in control of our own bodies. Our souls had been stolen, devoured by the ship's curse. And now we were nothing more than its puppets, doomed to walk its endless corridors forever. I stepped back, my heart racing. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. "You're not going to make it." Sarah's voice was quieter now, almost a whisper, as she drifted farther from me. None of us ever did. Suddenly, the walls shifted. The hallway seemed to stretch and twist, as if it were alive, changing around us. The ceiling lowered, the floor beneath my feet cracked, and the faint light overhead flickered like it was about to go out entirely. The ship was moving, shifting, pulling us deeper into its core. I turned away from Sarah and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away from this nightmare. I sprinted down the corridor, but it was like running through thick mud, every step harder than the last. The air was oppressive, and the ship seemed to moan and groan in protest, as if it was alive, angry. The walls closed in, and I could feel the ship's grip tightening around me, trapping me. "You can't escape." The whisper came from all directions, and I froze. I wasn't alone anymore. The passengers, the lost souls, were closing in on me. They moved without purpose, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. Some crawled on all fours, others drifted, floating just above the floor, their eyes glowing faintly with that same eerie green light. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. My legs felt like they were wading through water, heavy and slow. I couldn't move fast enough. The shadows reached for me, and the chill in the air grew colder, biting at my skin. I stumbled, falling to the ground, but when I looked up, the hallway had changed again. The walls weren't stone anymore. They were flesh, pulsating like veins, breathing in and out, feeding on the ship's dark energy. The floor was slick, wet with something that didn't feel right. I tried to crawl, my fingers slipping on the floor, but then something caught my foot. It was a hand. I looked down, and there it was, a pale, skeletal hand, its long fingers wrapped tightly around my ankle. The hand dragged me back, pulling me into the darkness. My heart raced as I clawed at the floor, but the grip was unrelenting, like it had all the time in the world. "Help me," the voice whispered from the hand. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't Sarah's. It was someone else's, someone who had been lost long before me. The voice was soft, desperate, filled with pain. "We're all trapped here." I twisted and turned, trying to break free, but it was no use. The more I struggled, the tighter the hand's grip became. I looked up, and that's when I saw it. In the distance, at the end of the hallway, a door stood open. It was different from the others. This door was made of dark, weathered wood, with strange symbols carved into it. The symbols seemed to glow faintly in the dark, and I could feel the pull, a strange, magnetic force drawing me toward it, but the hand on my ankle didn't let go. I couldn't tell if it was the ship's will or if it was my own desperate need to escape, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to get to that door. With all my strength, I kicked the hand away, breaking free from its grasp. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady, and I started running again, faster this time, driven by the desperation to escape whatever nightmare the ship had become. The door was closer now, but the shadows were closing in. The lost souls, their eyes now glowing brighter, were all around me, their hands reaching for me. I ran toward the door, my breath ragged, my pulse pounding in my ears. Just as I reached it, I felt the cold fingers brush my back, and I screamed, throwing myself through the door and into the unknown. And then the door slammed shut behind me. The world went silent. I found myself standing in complete darkness. There was no sound, no movement, just an overwhelming silence that pressed against me from all sides. I felt as though I was floating, untethered to anything, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was just out of reach, waiting for me to make the wrong move. The air was thick, suffocating, and as I stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened, a low hum began to vibrate through the ground beneath me. It was faint at first, like the deep thrum of a heartbeat, but it grew louder with every passing second, a constant, rhythmic pounding in my ears. The darkness seemed to shift around me, almost as though it had a life of its own. Slowly, faint shapes began to form in the void, shadows that crept toward me from every direction, their shapes stretching and warping as they got closer. And then, a voice. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was cold, flat, like it wasn't even speaking to me, but to something else, something that only it could see. I turned around, heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing there. Only darkness. The hum was now a deafening roar in my ears, and I stumbled forward, searching for something, anything that might offer me a way out of this void. My hands brushed against the walls, but they felt soft, like flesh alive. The walls seemed to pulse under my touch, as if the very ship had turned against me, closing in. "You can't run." This time, the voice came from behind me, and I spun around just in time to see the shadows coalesce into a figure, a tall, thin silhouette, its features hidden in the inky blackness. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the endless. The figure stepped forward, its long, spindly arms reaching for me, and as it did, I felt a rush of cold air seep into my bones, freezing me from the inside out. It was the same familiar presence, the same thing that had been haunting me from the start. "You are mine." The figure's voice now came from all directions at once, its words echoing in my mind, making it impossible to tell where the voice was truly coming from. Suddenly, the ground beneath me cracked, and I felt myself falling, plunging down into the darkness, deeper and deeper, until I thought I might be swallowed whole. The fall lasted forever, but then just as I thought I was going to lose consciousness. I slammed into something solid. I hit the ground with a sickening thud and gasped for air, disoriented, my head spinning. I blinked, trying to focus, but all I saw were dimly flickering lights overhead and the outline of a narrow hallway. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling with exhaustion. As I tried to steady myself, I noticed something on the floor, a marked dot. It was the same symbol I had seen before, the one that glowed in that eerie green light, the one that had appeared on the arms of the other passengers, the one that had been etched into the walls of the ship. The same symbol that had haunted me from the very beginning. I couldn't look away. The mark seemed to pulse in time with the ship's heartbeat. The moment I touched it, the coldness returned, rushing over me like ice, seeping into my very bones. I stumbled back, my mind swirling, but when I looked up, something caught my eye. At the end of the hallway was another door. This one was different, larger, made of ancient wood with chains wrapped around it, and it was glowing. Something inside me screamed that I had to go through it. I didn't know why, but I had to see what was on the other side. It was my only chance. I moved toward the door, but before I could reach it, I heard a noise, a soft rhythmic tapping. I turned, and there they were again, the passengers, the lost souls. They were walking toward me, their eyes empty, their bodies stiff. Some of them were dragging their feet. Others were floating just inches above the ground, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. And each of them had the same glowing mark on their skin. They were moving toward me with purpose now. No longer lost in their endless trance. They were coming for me. I had no choice. I ran toward the door, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the hall behind me. I didn't dare look back. The door was so close now. Just as I reached for the handle, I heard that voice again, the one that had been haunting me all along. You cannot leave. I wrenched the door open and stepped into the light. The light was blinding. I stumbled forward, shielding my eyes from the searing brightness. It wasn't sunlight, it was something unnatural, an intense glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I took a step forward, then another, the warmth of the book, light wrapping around me like a blanket. But something was wrong. The light wasn't comforting, it was too much. It wasn't meant for humans. It was like it was burning through my very being, scorching my soul. I tried to step back, but the door had vanished, leaving me trapped in the brilliance. And then the whispers returned. You shouldn't have come. You will never leave. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just the blinding light, the heat, the pressure dot, and then I saw it. A figure, floating at the center of the light. At first, it was only a shape, a vague outline. But as I blinked, it became clearer. It was a man, or at least, it had once been. He was tall, with long black hair, his face obscured by shadows. His clothes were tattered, old, as if he had been lost here for centuries. And his eyes, they were the same empty, hollow eyes I had seen in the mirror on the other passengers, in the shadows of the ship. I tried to speak, but no words came out. I felt my throat close up, as if the very air was choking me. The figure's eyes locked onto mine, and I knew, deep down, that I was staring into the face of someone who had been here longer than me, someone who had been claimed. The figure smiled. And that was when I knew. I wasn't going to escape this ship. I had become a part of it. The ship's curse had claimed me, and now there would be no end. Only endless wandering in the dark. Forever. The figure stepped closer, reaching out toward me. I could feel the coldness of his touch even before he made contact. Welcome home. And then, everything went dark. The light faded. I felt nothing. I was nothing. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't feel. But then, slowly, I started to hear the hum again. It was soft at first, like a far-off echo, but it grew louder, vibrating deep inside me. The sound was coming from the walls, around me, from the ship itself. The heartbeat, the pulse, I opened my eyes. I was back in the cold, dark hallway. But it was different this time. The walls were slick with something wet, something alive. The air smelled like decay, like rot, and the people, they were standing all around. M.E. But they weren't looking at me anymore. Their eyes were all fixed on the door at the end of the hallway. The same door that had vanished earlier. It was open now. And I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever was on the other side was waiting for me. But I didn't run. I couldn't run anymore. I wasn't just a passenger anymore. I was one of them. Come, the whisper called me. And for the first time, I felt it. I felt the ship's heartbeat. And I knew for certain that I was home.